Logging sucks. If you haven't tried logging applications, you probably don't understand what I'm talking about. If you don't know what logging is, why do you need it, or what is observability and how is it going to solve the problem for logging that we have been tackling for so long, I said all that in one breath. This is a video for you. If you are someone who's probably interested in solving the problem of logging in a better way, and maybe you want to wait till the end for what's an alternate apart from observability, then this is the video for you. I will leave timelines at the bottom for you to go through each of the chapters. If you have gone through already some of them and you know what observability is, you can go straight to the AWS part. But if you're not, definitely tag along and we'll get into the crux of the video. As always, all resources would be available on cloudsecuritybootcamp.com. That's the cloudsecuritybootcamp.com. And if you scroll down a bit, you probably would see all the resources for all the previous classes and the current classes over here. Simply click on the link and that should take you to the desired location as well. All the services that we're using in AWS that are in the lab, as well as in the exercise that we're showing, that would be covered as well. Now, I did start the conversation by saying that logging sucks, but for you to understand why observation or anything else needs required, you probably need to have a few understanding of a few basic functionalities. And as I said, if you have never done logging before, you don't understand logging before, I'll share that in a short 30-second. But if you know what those are, feel free to skip ahead. We're talking about traditional application. Like imagine if I want to start a website today called cloudsecuritypodcast.tv, I host that on my laptop. That's my workload. That's my infrastructure. That's basically everything. Now, if something was to go wrong for whatever reason, if you try refreshing the site, cloudsecuritybootcamp.com, doesn't come up. I start refreshing the site for cloudsecuritypodcast.tv, it doesn't come up. How do I identify what's wrong? That's where logging comes in. That's what logging does. Now, monolithic, microservices, and distributed services, these are just different kinds of implementing applications. If you are a large scale enterprise, you probably have services that are distributed everywhere. And if you are an old, large enterprise which has been in the IT space for a long time, chances are you have a lot of monolithic application. Monolithic application basically was my laptop example where everything is one place and everything is tightly coupled really quickly. So that's where the value of traditional application logging is, and it helps you with a lot of things. Now, it is also important to understand what the current state of logging is and how it is different in cloud. When we used to work in the data center world and we used to collect things like infrastructure log, application log, antivirus, firewall, IPS, IDS, I can keep going, all the logs that are in the world, basically with the understanding that one day when there's an incident or if there was an actual incident going on right now, I should be able to block it and stop it and probably be able to just decide, see right now what happens over there. Now, Cloud Log, and as you can see, I've got asterisks around infrastructure and application, even though a lot of the logs would be similar, but there would be infrastructure challenges based on whether the kind of compute you're using is different. You could also be using IaaS or infrastructure as a service, PaaS, platform as a service, SaaS or software as a service, which add further layer of complexity, but they would all produce some kind of log, and the amount of logs or which source can share the log would vary based on the kind of model you have picked up over there. So that's kind of where the asterisk comes in, but they all do produce logs. Now, since you have the logs, why do I feel logging sucks? Logging sucks because it is super time consuming. If you have worked in the security operations team, analyzing log is the number one thing that the analysts are doing all day. And you know what? Nothing wrong with it because that's where we have come from, but there is another possibility here. And that's what we're talking about over here, that instead of trying to log everything, why can't we just log things that we need to, which we know specifically are going to cause problems? If for whatever reason, if I have to find a needle in haystack being my log stash and needle being the problem that I'm trying to solve, whether it's a security problem or a non-security problem in a monolith or a services or distributed system, how do I do that quickly? Logging does not enable for that. Logging would send you a truckload of data, and you have to bring some context around it using something like a SIEM, which is really frustrating for SREs and DevOps because they don't really know how the application works. So you have to work with someone else to figure out why is the application not working. So this leads to alert fatigue as well. And that's the reason why I kind of feel that the current way of doing logging definitely is not the right way moving forward. We need to change that. Now, this is where observability comes in. Observability has been, I won't say proven, it definitely has shown the path for there is a possibility where you could have decreased alert fatigue. You would be working on a cost-effective way. Basically, you would be working on things that are solving log problems in a way that you don't have to worry about things like, how about the cost involved in resolving the same problem again and again that you just know keeps coming up, like your internet going down, and you just keep calling up your apartment manager, hey, why is it goes down? All he does is goes ahead and just restarts the server. Now, if you knew that's all required, you probably would just go down yourself and just do it yourself, right? Now, observability is looking at the holistic picture. It's also something that can also be as simple as checking the application health. Is that something that how you manage, whether the microservices that are being used or the processes that are being used, how is that going to work? And also, if you had a problem because you have a holistic view of the entire application, you would also be able to see it as a way to go, let's collaborate with other teams and see what they have to share. That way we can resolve this problem quickly. Now, I have sold observability as a future, but I also want to talk about monitoring as well, which a lot of people confuse themselves by. When you find you have a collection of logs, I'll use the internet example again. The way you would have tested it is by saying, I'm just going to refresh. I'm just going to Cloud Security Podcast or TV and see what happens. It doesn't load. Now, if you had a monitoring service, which would just every 5 seconds just hitting the refresh page and let you know that, hey, monitoring service is down. Hey, internet is down. Hey, internet is down. Now that is something which what monitoring would be. And that's the piece in the center where everyone's beautifully looking at these piece of infrastructure that, hey, this is amazing. We're all here to solve and monitor any problem that you find with all these applications that are running. Now, the problem with this is there are peripherals around these which are usually not seen, because if you have an application that is quite complex and it's using multiple applications to get data, unless you dig deep into the logs themselves, you would not know that, hey, on the left and on the right, there are other applications that are talking to the applications we are monitoring, which may or may not be the application that the organization uses, but are applications that are being used by third parties. How do you identify which ones of these you're monitoring? So this is where the observability comes in, where it is the entire life cycle of a program that you're trying to work towards and you're trying to identify. Now, if you were to bring the context of, say, a bit more holistically, I found this table and I thought it was really valuable to share that over here as well. I would focus your attention on the last two items over here for fault management and recovery. It's the way you ask the question that makes it different between each. It makes it different between the monitoring or observability. Like, I love the recovery one, where is my system backed up versus what can I do to prevent an issue from reoccurring? Like, I think if you have an incident, the last thing you want to think about is, hey, did we back that up? Instead, you want to be able to say, oh, I had an incident, I've resolved it, but what can I do to make sure this does not happen again? What are some of the processes? What is the improvement that I can do into this so that I can improve the way this would work? Now, observability as a concept is in software is designed, as I mentioned briefly, it's the entire life cycle. You have visibility on every process that is running in there. And in the AWS context, that's basically the text over there. But what I would call out is observability is the way that you would break down the entire application into multiple processes and have an exact trace of where a function is calling, where it's basically traversing the data, where it's going for logging, what kind of metric you should look at for improving that logging capability. Observability by itself has three pillars. As I mentioned already, I gave you the hint. It is logs, traces, and metric. I would probably start with logs as the first one, where, as I spoke about earlier in my 30-second speech, every application is producing logs. Now, the improvement that you can add on top of it is using something called metrics. You can use metrics as a way to enhance what the logs are being produced and use certain techniques to identify, oh, for logs coming from my internet provider for the websites being loaded, or for me to do anything on an application, I want certain metric to be created. For example, if the internet is down, I just want a metric alarm. I just want a metric for it. How often does it happen? Why does it happen? What's the process for it? Trace is being able to trace it back to the exact pinpoint problem that caused the root problem in the first place. To put this in perspective, for people who may have watched Tom and Jerry, it used to be like a thing where there would be a line of gunpowder leading up to dynamite, and Tom or Jerry would just light up one side and you can see it go all the way to the dynamite. That's how I would explain trace, where you know there's a potential problem at the end of this tunnel, and you want to be able to get to it, and you're basically following the gunpowder along all the way to the destination. Now, this is a screenshot I got from AWS Observability talk that they gave earlier. They only mentioned 3 services: CloudWatch logs, CloudWatch metrics, and X-ray traces. Later in the lab, I'll show you a bit of the X-ray traces as well as CloudWatch and Cloud metrics. But you might look at this and think, hey, wait, what happened to security? For that, I'm not saying they don't really care about us as an important part. They do have security as a priority. But in this case of logging and improving your tracing, you need to do a bit more digging. So if you find the URL, and I'll leave this link onto the description as well or in the comment. Basically, if you find what services are enabled by CloudWatch, you should be able to identify what services are something that you can integrate into CloudWatch. Now, I have CloudTrail, CloudWatch Agent, and all these services that are listed over here. But some of these were called out in the last 2 classes. So I'll leave a link for that somewhere over here at the top. So you should be able to see what Inspector does, what CloudTrail can do, and a reminder for people. Definitely check out the cost involved with before starting at any of the services. Definitely make sure you have the right quota for it. But to enable all of this, even if you had this, you need something called instrumentation. So if you focus on the bottom half of the diagram, this is from another AWS image. Instrumentation is what helps you create or produce logs, metrics, traces. And that in AWS context is usually CloudWatch Agent or X-Ray Agent, or they have something called the AWS distro for OpenTelemetry. OpenTelemetry is a different standard, and I would definitely encourage you to check that out if you are someone who's interested in open source information on observability. Definitely check that out. But in the AWS context, there are already some services that you can use to get that information. Let's go into the lab and let's show you an example of CloudWatch, CloudTrail, and maybe also some of the additional examples that you may use for observability or maybe potentially observability in the AWS Cloud scenario. Okay, so this is my AWS console. I'm sure you would have seen this plenty of times in the previous 2 videos we've done, but in case you have one not there and your first time you're watching it, this is basically my AWS console, what it looks like. I'm logged in with an admin user at the moment, and what we're trying to do is we're going to have a CloudTrail. It's simple as searching for CloudTrail over there. I can just go into it, and I want to integrate this with CloudWatch so I can create metrics for this. So let's see what we can do. Oh, ignore the error because I deleted the keys. That's why that error is. But essentially, what I can do is I can pick an existing log. I'm just going to use the one that does not have any problems at the moment. I have a section of CloudWatch log. Now you can obviously add this as you're creating a new trail as well. And I'm going to come here. I'm going to edit. So I'm going to enable CloudWatch log. Now what this is going to do is it is going to create something called a log group inside CloudWatch, which then I can, when I go into the CloudWatch system itself, I would be able to create some metrics around that. So I'm going to say, yep, CloudTrail. And just so that I can identify it, I actually don't have any other CloudWatch log, but just to quickly check, I'm just going to open this new tab and go CloudWatch because I don't want to recreate something that I might have created before. So this is what CloudWatch looks like. And there are sections underneath for alarms, metrics. Essentially, log groups are under logs. Remember, I spoke about X-ray traces. So your observability, the whole logs, metrics, and traces. Alarms is the traditional way of doing monitoring, and there's a separate one for application monitoring just to confuse everyone. So I have had all these log groups that are inactive now, and they have not been used. So just making sure, yep, nothing is active. So that's pretty cool. All right, so I'm going to create this log group called AWS CloudTrail Logs. I'm going to just give it an existing one if I can have one. Yep, perfect. I'm just going to use that. For, again, this is an example one. You probably would have your own specific one. I'm going to save changes. What it should do in the background, it is enabling the capability for any more CloudTrail logs that are going to come in. They all would start sending information to CloudWatch. Now, this is good for 2 reasons. One is that for whatever reason, if I delete CloudTrail because I'm a hacker, I got access to your AWS account, and I log in, the first thing I would do is either disable the logging going forward into CloudWatch, or if I'm not someone who knows AWS much, I would just go delete CloudTrail. That's pretty much it. Would not even care about the fact that that's going to be like for people who have done the offensive training of pen testing, it is like running nmap basically as you walk in, and nmap minus a, and everyone in the network is aware that you're there. That's probably a bad idea if you just go in and simply delete the CloudTrail. So I would not go and do that, but instead I would just disable CloudWatch log if I know that there is a CloudWatch log going, or I would do it at the S3 bucket. I would just say, hey, stop logging, and I don't want you to log anymore. So you could do that as well. So now if I come over here and if I just refresh this, okay, so there's something definitely being created here. And it obviously there's a 15-minute delay, but you will probably see this is created today, 26th of, it's midnight over here, so it's showing the midnight time. So this is good. Now I have something called the metrics filter. I want to start creating metrics for this. Now, what would you want the filter to be is a question. Would you want it to be matching a particular host name, username, error scenario, or info logs? Maybe I'll take info logs. I'll just say custom log pattern. Yeah. I think that what you would do is just pattern and see if it finds a result. Nope. So I probably would just spend some time playing around with this. So you're able to create something called the metric. I'm just going to call the info metric. And I'll get some details about it, create a whole namespace. But essentially, this is where you would create a metric. Now, based on what I've been sharing right now through the slides, observability has metric, has logs, and has something called traces. Now, you would see that there is X8 traces here, but it's like, I would say your application should be ready to do this as well if you're going on the path of doing this, which is why I did not cover it. I think it's a bit too advanced to cover for this particular lesson when you're starting off just doing simple logging, tracing, not going down the whole entire observability path, as long as you have the capability to do, say, set an alarm. So as simple as if I go back over here, if I go EC2, and let's see if I have any EC2 running. It would be awesome if I have, nope, I don't have any. But for example, if I had an EC2 instance running, I could have that CloudWatch, essentially Amazon images. It would come with a CloudWatch agent, which you can enable, and that should allow you to create a log group similar to the one that I created for CloudTrail here. And after that, you should be able to go into it and you should be able to create metrics for it. Metrics for things like, hey, if you change the security group, I want an alarm to be raised if the security group is open to the internet. If you create an S3 bucket that is open to the internet, I want a metric for that. Like things like that is what you would definitely want to be able to create. There are some sample ones available when you go down the path of doing EC2 LogWatch, but that's usually around CPU usage and memory usage. That's not right. That's really security, I guess, sometimes. Or I guess it is kind of security. If you're doing Bitcoin mining, the CPU usage would be just going off the roof. So maybe there is some element of security, but primarily you want to use the CloudWatch coming from CloudTrail or coming from EC2 for specific scenarios that are meant for that. Now, I do want to give a special shout out to something else as well, which is probably something new that they're trying. It does cost money pretty much from the moment you start using it, in spite of the 30-day trial. But it's called the Amazon Detective Service, which is supposed to help you identify security issues and investigate them. And in the back end, it's these kind of services that are supporting it, which some of them will cover in a later half of this video, but I'll definitely check out some of these. Macy is kind of like your sensitive data. It looks at S3 bucket and if there is something sensitive. We spoke about Inspector Guard Duty in the previous video. Again, link there, but definitely in the description as well. Definitely check that out. And that's pretty much what I wanted to cover. So from an observability perspective, now we are able to send CloudTrail logs all the way to CloudWatch. And beyond that, we can create metrics and hopefully some traces in the future as well. Okay, so you would have seen in the lab that we did, I did barely just touch on traces with X-ray. And there's a reason for this. Tracing itself is not quite mature. This is, again, a screenshot from one of the videos from AWS. If you notice the services on the left-hand side, not all of them provide all the capabilities. Like CloudWatch agent can help you do logs, metrics, which is what we saw in the lab. But X-ray can only do traces. And now you're like, well, but I need all three to have observability. Yes, that is true. And that's the reason why observability is still quite new. And a lot of people, when they talk about tracing in AWS land, at least from a security perspective, they're primarily talking about logs and metrics. But the bigger question over here is also, how do you like what's the angle here? Like, how do I even create these metrics that I'm talking about? Like, I gave you a couple of examples in the lab, but let's just walk through. If you have an application today, how would you go about doing this? Now, this example I love because a lot of security operations team use this as a way to improve their SIEM or security incident event management systems or security hub or whatever their central monitoring place is. They use this as a way to identify what kind of metrics we should be looking for. We have all the logs in the world, but what kind of metrics we can look for? So when and however far the future may be for tracing, or maybe next month, depending on when AWS makes the announcement or any of the services make an announcement, at least I would be ready with the right metrics so I can trace it to the point that I want to. So the way you would start is, imagine you have an application. Let's just use cloudsecuritybootcamp.com as the application. It is my crown jewel. It is the place where I have stored all the resources for this particular lab and exercise that is associated with this bootcamp. I've also stored the previous labs. I've also stored the future ones in the as well. So for me, this is my crown jewel. The way I would go about this, if I was a security operation person looking at this application, one application at a time, you don't want to do the entire system altogether. So first thing I would do is I would do something called a threat modeling exercise to identify what are potential attack paths or attacks that I can do on this application, which may lead to compromise. Could it be a phishing email? Could it be the fact that I have done a DDoS or a distributed denial of service attack? Or can I just simply install a malware and not get caught by the antivirus? Whatever that threat modeling gives up as an answer, I would make a note of it. And the next step I would do is I would refer to industry standards for what are some of the techniques used by hackers. For example, there's a framework or there's a resource called Attack Miter. They do a great job of reporting on all the techniques that are popular among hackers, and they record that. Now, I've got the threat modeling information, and I've also got the information about the Attack Metric as well. What I would do now is use that to identify, hey, what agents do I have available for instrumentation? Remember how instrumentation is the way you would get there. So for my instrumentation perspective, I have CloudWatch agent, I may have Security Hub, I may have something called the SIEM solution. Basically, I'm creating metrics so that I can either uplift my existing observability dashboards or launch new ones for applications that I have not created before. That's the way I would do it. Now, I did write them in a text format in case someone just did not get what I said. I did not have captions for this. So why not just write that down as well? So again, same process, crown jewel, threat modeling session, use Attack Miter, and then use instrument agents to identify what practical attack paths or attack vectors, as some technical people might like to call it, and just repeat through the cycle for other applications as well. Now, we are talking about a central observability platform. And I did mention in the beginning that I had something which is probably better than observability, depending on how your application has been deployed and what the capability of your team is like. I've got AWS Security Hub with Amazon Event Bridge over there. Now, AWS Security Hub, even though you can aggregate a lot of events there, the only integration it has at the moment is with CloudTrail, not with CloudWatch. So you can send events to CloudTrail, but it would just tell you what you have done in Security Hub. So it's kind of pointless. But what you can do is you can use something called Event Bridge, and I'll tell a bit about Event Bridge in a second. But you can use Event Bridge as a vehicle to inform Security Hub of events that it should make a note of so you can investigate. Or you could have your central observability dashboard as your logs are coming in with metrics that are being created in something called a SIEM or Security Incident and Event Management. Or you could just make an ELK stack, ELK stack, which is basically an open source dashboard you can create and manage for looking at your observability metrics. Last but not least, which is where I said I'll talk about Event Bridge in a second, is the event-driven architecture with AWS Service. If you are running applications that help you, produce events, which is what all of us are doing by running our application in AWS, we are able to use our capability to be able to not use logging, but instead use events as a way to identify. Yes, if that's confusing, let me just explain. You know how there are all these things that are out there that I mentioned earlier in my threat modeling session that I can do. Now, a few people on the internet are really kind enough to make a note of this and provide this as threat intelligence feed. Same with Attack Miter. Now, there are services within AWS that you can use that are already providing this information. Like I've mentioned few, like CloudTrail identifies your audits. GuardDuty is your threat detection. You have Inspector, which is vulnerability management. You may have third-party integration, like we shared the example of Sneak in last week's video where we were looking at container, or we had libraries. You can have other third parties as well that you can use to bring in information, which is threat intelligence information, onto your Amazon, you could use something like an event bridge to just basically send this as an SMS to a alert person based on what your metric is. You can use AWS Security Hub to do something like, I don't know, just a follow-up action. But event bridge is something I just want to double click on for a second. Event bridge is an example of an event bus model within AWS. By what, if you have never heard of event bus, the simple way to explain this is, imagine it's a road, literally just a highway or motorway, depending on what part of the world you are in, and any number of cars at any point in time can go in there. Now, all these events that are happening in the AWS world, like for example, if I create a user, that is an event, that's a car that's going on that motorway. Now, there is I think in Australia, we have something called the toll booth. I'm sure there's a concept similar in other places around the world, but essentially, there are motorways or toll roads where you have to pay money to use the road. And they use these boom gates, or they use these boom gates to charge you money, at least to know that, oh, yeah, this was the car that passed and I've made the note of the number. So the same way in this context, event bus is the road where you have to pay toll to just work and access it. Now, technically it's free, but it's kind of where you go. Just go with me with the example. Now, the car that I have on this road at the moment is going to be the event when I create an IAM user. Now, the first meter that comes in to identify, hey, what's that car over there? And it would identify, oh, it's an event. What kind of event is it? It's an IAM user being created. Now, if my tolling station, or in this example, my API call over there or my event call over there was designed to react and do some kind of an action automatically based on that particular fact that, hey, someone created a user, they should have or they should not have. If they should not have, I can trigger a Lambda function to make it go away, do an auto remediation, as they call it in the technical world. Like, that's the power of this. Now, this is just a simple example, but you can take this all the way. You can have multiple cards going, which is multiple events running at the same time. And depending on which event do you really care about to trigger an alert on, you just have an alert for that, just mining the road completely for what kind of events are going, and it would only trigger when the right event happens. That is event-driven architecture. Basically, your entire application is designed around the aspect of serverless, where you're not thinking about more from a logging perspective. You're more thinking from a perspective of, hey, I actually don't really care about the logs. I only care about the event that something has happened. Like, I care about the event that an S3 bucket is open to the internet, or a security group is open and to the internet. I want to be able to just react to that. I don't really care about the logs. So this is one way of looking at another lens to the whole logging situation for traces that you want to create in your AWS cloud. Now, that's what I wanted to cover from a security tracing perspective. You should be able to use this information to create logging and think about how would you do security logging for applications that you're trying to create. How would you think about, from an enterprise perspective, centralize it into one place so that you can create metrics for it, either using AWS services or free open source services, or services that your people have to pay money for, which sometimes can be quite expensive. But at the end of the day, it is important for you to know how to identify and use logs for your advantage. So when a hacker is striking, you are able to do something to stop that from going on. I hope you got the information for this valuable. And if you have more questions about cloud security, definitely feel free to drop them in. If you would like us to talk more about the event architecture and what security people are doing, some of the advanced security people are doing, definitely drop that as a comment as well. I will try to cover that in a video. But if you like talking about cloud security, I would see you in other interviews that we're doing. We have an interview tomorrow as well. You would find all of that on the Cloud Security Podcast YouTube channel. So definitely subscribe and hit the bell icon so you get informed when the new video is out. Otherwise, I will see you in the next video. Peace.